Hi everyone, it's early morning on Monday. The Booker Prize winner is going to be announced this evening, and last night I went to the shortlisted readings where all 6 authors shortlisted for the prize were there, and it was such a fun and interesting conversation, but I don't think it was broadcast or even filmed, but I filmed it because I was there in the front row, and it was such a pleasure hearing all these authors talk, and I've had a few messages from people this morning asking where they can listen to this conversation. But because I recorded it all, I thought I might as well put it all up so you can enjoy it too. But I have to warn you that the video footage is quite rough, the sound is quite rough, so I apologize for that, but I was just filming it on my phone, not even thinking that I would upload it or anything, just so I would have it for my sort of reference, but because it seems like it wasn't filmed at all or broadcast at all, I thought I would just upload it for you in case you want to listen to it. So there were readings by each of the authors, which I didn't record. I just recorded the Q&As between all of the authors and then a Q&A with the audience at the end. So here it is, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did.
Margaret, why did you decide to write the sequel to Handmaid's Tale? And perhaps equally relevantly, why have you made us wait so long?
Okay, why did I wait so long? Because after the Cold War ended, there was the 90s, during which we were told that history had ended and we could all just now go shopping forever.
Fantastic. It's worked out really well, I think.
Yeah, well, it turned out not to be true. So then we got into the 20th century and a couple of things happened, including the Twin Towers, including the financial meltdown in 2008, and then including the recent election of he who shall not be named. So I'd actually started the notes on this book before that election, but it certainly was invigorating, shall we say. So we had been going away from Gilead for some years, and then we turned around and started going back towards it in so many ways and in so many different countries. So I felt it was time to revisit it and find out how Gilead ended, because we knew from Handmaid's Tale that it did end. And I've always been interested in how totalitarianisms collapse. So I wanted to explore that. I did not, however, write it earlier because I thought what everybody meant, including me, was the continuation of The Handmaid's Tale in the voice of its narrator, which I could not have done.
I wanted to ask you, as I was reading this, I kept thinking of each individual case, it feels like, of women's reproductive freedom being limited in more and more parts of the world, especially in some states in the United States, closer to you, Northern Ireland, closer to us. I wonder if you feel the world has become more Gileadic.
The world has become more Gileadic.
I'm assuming that's the adjective.
That's the problem. Yes, it has been, but Gilead is not just a society in which it's men versus women. It's a real totalitarianism in which there is a class structure. So who was doing better in Elizabethan England, Queen Elizabeth or a male ditch digger? So if you're a highly placed woman in Gilead, you're going to have a better material life than a lower down man of an econo family. You'll remember that there were econo wives in The Handmaid's Tale. They had to do everything. Sound familiar? They had to do all these different functions. So it is a hierarchy, and we just happen to see it from the point of view of women, but it's not just women having bad time over here, men having a terrific time over there. That's not how it works. It's not how totalitarianisms work.
And I wondered if you would talk to us a little bit about the Pearl Girls, who are in addition. It's a disheartening truth to realise, as you read that there is no society so repressive they can't attract converts to their repression.
Well, totalitarianisms like that always come in as utopias. They always say we're going to make things better for you, except first we have to get rid of those people. And there's always some those people. But it's also because it's a religious totalitarianism, it's a theocracy. It's a proselytizing theocracy, so it has missionaries. And like missionaries, as missionaries have done in many parts of the world and many times, the missionaries are also information gatherers, as they have often been. So the Pearl Girls are sent out 2 by 2, just like Mormons, to go and recruit people for Gilead. And Gilead has something to offer in the society to the north of it, where there are homeless people, where there are people out on the street, because much as you think democracies are wonderful, they sure have not solved for homeless and poor people in our time, and not in the time of Gilead either. So there's an attraction. How would you like 3 meals a day, some nice clothes, and a roof over your head for a change?
I think it's an undeniable point, of course. I felt like you were slightly enjoying, a little tiny bit, the notion that for the Pearl Girls, Canada was a depraved, monstrous place to go.
Well, from some points of view, it is. That is the thing about liberal democracies. Not everybody thinks they're wonderful, virtuous places.
Sure.
Hate to break this to you, but so it is.
It's a disappointment to us all. Obviously, the television adaptation of Handmaid's Tale has been an enormous and global success. I wondered if it affected the way you wrote about or even thought about your characters.
Okay, so it has been an enormous success, and good for them. They've thrown themselves into it, and I'm some kind of a producer on it, or something.
Hands-on producer, Margaret?
I have a title. I'm not sure what it means. What it really means is that I talk to the showrunner on the phone, and I say things like, "You may not kill Aunt Lydia." and no baby will be harmed in the making of the show. Like that. So it was a tightrope act in that we were both writing things that the other one hadn't seen yet.
That sounds incredibly stressful.
No, it wasn't.
No?
Well, my book takes place 16 years into the future. So, in fact, the showrunner of The Handmaid's Tale is out of his mind with joy, because I've given him a lot more whiteboard space to cover with notes.
And he's got an end point to reach.
And some
grail for television.
Some new characters. But we didn't want to contradict each other. But I also didn't want to write a novelization of the TV show, so we avoided those things.
I want to ask you about 100 more questions, but I can't because we'll get behind straight away. So if you have more questions, and this is obviously true for all our authors, I hope you're storing them up for the last bit. But thank you, Margaret. Lucy, this is an enormously complicated book which appears simple, I think. Most of it is a single sentence. As you've proven, it doesn't make any difference to how you read it aloud. It's not difficult because of that. But it's such a complicated story told kaleidoscopically. I wondered how you went about structuring it, writing it. I know you added, did you say 30,000 words in proof?
Did I add? Oh yeah, of course, yeah. There were always more things to think about, I thought. Yeah, it needed more and more stuff. It needs to just sort of envelop you, like a quilt or something. You've got to be submerged in this world. And it has a plot, quite a simple plot. I don't like plots much, but I sank to it nonetheless. It crept in. But otherwise, I think it is easy to read. It's not complicated. It's sort of as complicated as you want to make it for yourself.
It's, I think, rightly received comparisons with James Joyce, but it also made me think a little bit of Mrs. Dalloway. And I wondered if I was the only person to feel that way, but this woman's internal monologue as she tries to kind of cope with all of life and a single day at the same time.
I've heard it's like Mrs. Dalloway, and I know I haven't read Mrs. Dalloway.
Fantastic.
And there are many other things I haven't read either, if we have to get into it.
No. I have a big long list of things you haven't read, but we don't have to do it. There's another story that runs in counterpoint to your narrator, the story of a lioness and her cubs, which I sort of thought was there as a wordless counterpoint, an instinct counterpoint to the story which is all words, all thoughts. And I wondered if you would tell us a bit about why you included that. The stories do connect your narrator and the lioness, but not where people might expect.
Yeah, I think it's very hard to write about animals, but that's no reason not to try. And the main narrator is a very talkative gal, and to herself, and the monologue goes on and on. It's very unstoppable. And the lion, I think now, I think of it as a kind of these areas of silence in the book, where it's certainly not verbal. The lion does make some noises sometimes, and the cubs do too. But mainly it's a more silent world. And though she has the profound thoughts, not about porn though.
The themes that run through this book are like the nervous system of America, I think. It's gun crime and pollution, healthcare, medical bills, and alongside that runs this sort of drumbeat in her mind of the American dream as it was. So Hollywood movies, and especially old ones, Little House on the Prairie. I wondered if this is a novel about what's been lost. Grief is such a theme of this story.
Yes. I think to the narrator, some things have been lost, like Little House on the Prairie. To me, I think it was probably lost from the start of America. And it just didn't start well, did it? And it's gone on from it to fail. And as you say, it's really failing now. So yeah, she has some nostalgia, I guess, for some good things. Not all of it's bad in America. They're quite inventive people, actually. But she's probably got it a bit wrong, too, that this was all okay. Like, she's quite surprised when her daughter, who's half Native American, suddenly tells her, I watch these musicals with you for one reason. And she says, well, why? And the daughter says, to see how I'm not white. And I think that's a big issue in America these days, too. That, the huge separation of so-called races. And it's very discouraging to see.
You've pushed back against people who've complained about the length of this book, and rightly so, I think, saying that people don't tend to make that complaint when it's a book about a man's thoughts, and that there might be some gendered element to this critique. I wondered if you might tell us a bit more about.
Well, essentially, I think it's time for men to shut up completely. It's quite ridiculous to tell a woman to shut up. So I'm not listening, as you can see.
That is the spirit. Ladies and gentlemen, Lucy Ellmann. Bernadine, this book has, I think, 12 women's lives overlapping and connecting, some in a very close and obvious way, mother and daughter, some are much more distant and opaque at first. Did you imagine the individual voices first, or was it always going to be a sort of web of connection?
It began with Carol, actually, the character I just spoke about. And I wanted to write about multiple black British women because we're not really peopled in the pages of British fiction, hardly at all, going back, 60 years since the first sort of big wave of Caribbean people came to this country and people from Africa. So I thought I want to create a novel. I started it 5 years before it's finished, so I started it about 6 years ago. I want to create a novel which has multiple black women in it, British women in it. And I began with Carol, and then her mother featured in her story, and then her friend Letitia featured in her story. And when they appeared in her story, I loved them as characters, and I thought I want them to have their own sections. The thing to say about the novel is that each character has her own section, but they're also kind of all interconnected. There are X degrees of separation between the characters. So it's not a book of short stories, it is a cohesive novel, but they all have their own sections. And so Carol has a section, and then Bumi, and then Letitia, and then I move on to other characters. And the characters, in a way, emerged as I was writing them. And so I thought I wanted to create a black woman, a young black woman, who is in the corporate world, because I thought we don't see that. And so I then gave Carol a backstory that would make sense of the journey that she has to make in this country in order to be successful. And she kind of rejects her cultural background in order to blend into university at Oxford when she goes there, but also into the banking culture.
The very first story, Amma, begins, it's the opening night, or the press night I should say, of her play at the National, and she goes back to thinking about her early days in London, her beginning in theatre, living in a squat in King's Cross, and it's so minutely imagined. I didn't move to London until the late 90s, but as I was reading it I thought, well, this must be your past. And then the second chapter is Yaz, who's a student, and I was like, well, I know you're not an undergraduate, so that's definitely not you. And then I wondered which one of these women is your favourite. Mine is Carol, so I was glad you read her.
Yes, my favourite, I think I do like Yaz, who is a 19-year-old student, but I also like Hattie, who is a 93-year-old farmer who's lived on her family farm all her life. Amma is kind of the only character who's kind of loosely based on my younger self. So I wanted to write about the 1980s feminist arts culture that I was a part of, which nobody really knows about, other than the people who experienced it. And I realised that, we have a sort of new wave of feminists at the moment, and they don't really understand or have access to our feminist history in this country, and certainly not our black feminist history. So I wanted to write about, young black women creating their own arts groups. I used to run a theatre company called Black Women, which we founded in 1982. And Amma is a lesbian, and it's very much about women. She's living in a kind of segregated community. She's living in a squat, and she's getting on with her creativity. And the book opens with her arriving at the National Theatre, because 40 years or so after she started in theatre, and she's been working in alternative theatre and community theatre, fringe theatre, she finally, a woman director, has taken the helm at the National Theatre, which we know hasn't happened yet. And she phones her up and says, I want you to come and do a play with us. And so Amma has a play opening at the National Theatre called The Last Amazon of Dahomey. So she's gone from sort of countercultural, outsider, marginalised theatre maker to somebody who's suddenly in the heart of the establishment.
Yes, it's nice that the idea of having a woman being the artistic director of the National Theatre is as futuristic as Gilead. Sorry, how very childish of me. Ladies and gentlemen, Bernadine Evaristo. Chigozie, I wondered if you might tell us a bit about who the narrator of this book is, because it's not as obvious as it first appears.
Yeah, so the narrator is a spirit that is believed by the people in West Africa to ensoul every individual. So the spirit stays with you from the moment before you were born, actually. So there's a chapter in the book that chronicles the time before Chinonso comes into existence. So the Chi is a reincarnating spirit, just like human beings. It's been going and coming for some 700 years, And so, it has embodied all this knowledge and history. So it's a chronicler of history as well as a philosopher and, a talkative spirit, like, Lucy's narrator, I guess.
And the kind of class and education divide in this book is incredibly important. I think British people tend to assume we're the only ones who obsess about class. It's just not true, is it? It's a hugely important part of it.
No, it's not. In Nigeria especially, there's a stratification system that is, it's not like it's coded or anything, but it's just something that people are aware of. Like, once I get to, the airport in Lagos, for instance, the fact that I'm coming from America, everyone is going to be calling me Oga, Oga, Oga. So I'm immediately elevated. So the poor truly suffer. In fact, I had an essay recently that I wrote where I termed Nigeria as a fiefdom of the vulnerable. So those who are wealthy and protected are not vulnerable. They don't suffer as much as, of course, those who are vulnerable by virtue of poverty. So for instance, you can have where in a particular place where there are no good hospitals, that people don't seem to care because they can easily just fly their people out, their family members, and especially our politicians, and those who can afford to do that, just wallow.
This book is so many types of story. It's a coming-of-age story, a love story, and a mythic tale, an archetypal tale. And I wondered which one was your primary force of thinking as you were constructing it.
Well, so I wanted to do a lot of things with the novel. So it was inspired by a tragic incident that I witnessed myself, where somebody had been scammed and then came to North Cyprus, where I was living at the time, and then he discovers that he had been robbed of everything, and he forced his death from the attic of a 4-story building. So it was mostly me trying to recreate his journey, because he told me in the 4 days that I knew him that he had sold everything he had to come to Cyprus because he was in love with this lady and he wanted to go back to marry her. He wanted to make quick money. He assumed that coming to Europe he would be able to land quick money and go back. So that's the personal layer of the story. I always say that I try to write novels that work at least in 3 levels of interpretation: the conceptual, the philosophical, and the personal. So in terms of the conceptual, of course, the Chi as the narrator of the novel allows me to tell the story not just of Chinonso but of the civilization of the Igbo people, their history. There's a time in which the Chi recollects, in which it ensouls this individual who lived in America, who was a slave. So it tells a long story. But also I wanted to I didn't want to write the novel in the in a first person or a third person point of view. So the Chi affords me the liberty to do that. He is a first person narrator, he's a third person narrator, and he's a second person narrator, all melded into one. And so also I wanted to recreate this ancient way in which stories are told in form of a confessional, a kind of testimony before a jury. So it used to be that people would gather at the village square if somebody has committed a crime, and then the person will be asked to just tell his story. So there are digressions. He's trying to tell the story of Chinonso, but also to make a case for itself, for its continuous existence.
Ladies and gentlemen, Chigozie Obioma. Salman, this is a book full of merriment, I thought, of jokes and in-jokes, references to everyone from Ionesco to Oprah, and yet it's also about love and estrangement and death and bereavement. I wondered, does a quest narrative allow you to encompass all of life?
Well, I think there's something interesting about sometimes writing against the grain of the material. To write about things which are sad, tragic, melancholy, but to write about them with a comic voice. And And I wanted the book to have that voice, even though some of the material is very dark. And one of the things about the road, I mean, the road is such an ancient metaphor for life. It's actually older than the novel. The road goes back to Pilgrim's Progress. It goes back to, in the Persian text that is one of the influences on this book, The Conference of the Birds by Fariduddin Attar, the journey as being a metaphor of life. And what it allows you to do, and what I wanted it to allow me to do, is to write a book which changes all the time, in the way that you can have, as you go down the road, you can have different sorts of experience. And I wanted the book to be kind of metamorphic in that way. So some of the time it's kind of sad and naturalistic, and some of the time it's antic and playful, and there's a bit of it that is kind of a spy novel, and there's an aspect of it that's kind of a science fiction novel, and there's a bit of it, you mentioned the Mastodons, that's a kind of absurdist parable. And I wanted it to be kind of all those things, if I could, and the metaphor of the road unites those things, I think.
And it also allows you to create something which is both, I think, an exploration of contemporary America, but a critique of it at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I think I wanted the book to be like panoramic, if I could. The previous two novels I wrote were almost entirely set in New York City, in the 212 area code. And I remember thinking, while I was writing The Golden House, the book that came before, that next time you have to leave town. And you have to get out of this world that you're very familiar with and enter other kinds of America, and see what happens there. And these travelers, these wanderers of mine in this crackpot pharmaceutical salesman and his mutinous and largely fictional teenage son, gave me my way of entering those worlds.
I want to ask you more questions, but we're going to run out of time if I do. Ladies and gentlemen, Salman Rushdie. The incidents, and especially the locations which shape Layla's life in this novel, are real, not fictional. And I wondered if you would tell us a little bit about the street of brothels and perhaps the graveyard.
I mean, of course, it's all imaginary, but I was very much inspired, guided by historical events and real tragedies, and also people I have met over the years and observed. Particularly the beginning scene, the opening scene, as I was writing Layla's story, I did remember a real tragedy that took place in Istanbul. A transgender sex worker was brutally murdered, and her body was dumped in a bin, just like the final insult. And I remember that. I think I was also inspired by a series of scientific and medical studies that I have read about how after the moment of death, after the heart has stopped beating, the mind can remain active for another few minutes. That to me was an amazing puzzle. Particularly in Canada, doctors have observed persistent brain activity in dead patients for about 10 minutes. And I think I wanted to add my own 38 seconds to that.
Yeah, you're allowed 38 seconds. We're all prepared to grant it you. It feels like Istanbul is a city in flux all the time. And in a way, Leela is both part of it, but she almost reflects it because her life changes so dramatically at every stage. I wondered if you'd tell us a bit more about that.
Yes, I think it's a liquid city, not yet settled. And maybe I was also partly motivated by my own experience in Istanbul when I first moved to the city. And maybe I should tell you that I've never lost this feeling of being kind of a latecomer. I wasn't born and bred in Istanbul. I moved to Istanbul, I fell in love with the city, and when you experience that everything is important, every minute detail is important. I've lived many years in Istanbul, but I also felt from time to time suffocated in Istanbul, so it's a difficult city sometimes. But if I may share this, the place where I used to live, which is mentioned in the novel towards the end, is the street of cauldron makers. It's a very steep street that runs all the way down from Taksim Square. And even the history of that street tells us so much about the complexities of Turkey, because this was a place that was mostly populated by minorities. So there were lots of Christian and Jewish families there, but they were driven out. They didn't feel welcome, they left in 1940s, 50s. And then sexual minorities moved in 1970s, But after 1980, many of them had to leave. They were driven out. And then in late 1990s, maybe bohemian artists moved in, feminists moved in, I moved in at that time. But from every group of people who left, someone had remained. So when I moved in, I had an old Armenian neighbor, I had an old Jewish neighbor, I had a middle-aged transgender neighbor. And I remember on the night of the earthquake, I was in that house, in that flat, and we all ran out, and there were people who would not speak to each other. Particularly, we had a very religious, bigoted, I should say, roaster who wouldn't talk to sexual minorities. On the night of the earthquake, I saw that man with shaking hands, opening a pack of cigarettes and offering it to my transgender neighbor, and she was crying, her mascara was leaking. So in the moment, you know, in the face of death, I think we all became one for a few hours. Of course, the next morning, he was not talking to her again. But Istanbul is full of such stories, you know, it's very visually striking.
The very beginning of Layla's life is entwined with falsehood. Her family isn't as she assumes them to be from her very birth. And I think because of that, perhaps, it's her friends that are her real family, and that's who you focus on in this book.
Yes, she's born in the city of Van, which is a very important city, historic city, I would say on the opposite side of Turkey, towards the other end, closer to Russia. And maybe I need to share with you that this is a polygamous family, so she grows up with two mothers and one father, without quite knowing which one of these two women is her biological mother. But if I may add this, even though this is a book that deals with difficult subjects, including sexual abuse, and death is not an easy subject either, I personally sincerely believe it is a book that celebrates diversity and friendships. So when you say family, there's a moment in the book where it says we all have two types of families. We have our blood families, the ones we are born into, and if our blood family is loving and kind, we should count our blessings. That's wonderful. Not everyone is as lucky, and particularly to those people, in a way, the book says, do not forget, as you keep living, you're going to have another family, and that's going to be your water family. And our water families are composed of our friends. The number of those friends can't be dozens and dozens, maybe 5, 6 maximum. But these are the witnesses of all the journeys and seasons that we go through. And what I've seen in countries like Turkey, where democracy is lost, and the public space has become more intolerant, and where it is difficult to be different, you know, for whatever reason, the color of your skin, your political views, your sexual identity, for whatever reason, if you're different, life is not easy. I think particularly among outcasts, or people who have been pushed to the periphery, the water families have become more important over the years. So that kind of solidarity, that kind of sisterhood does make a difference.
Elif Shafak.
Just like everyone else, it's been a privilege and a pleasure to be in the presence of you guys. And it's been a literary education for us. I think I can speak on behalf of everyone. I also wanted to say specifically to Chigozie Obioma, thank you for both your books. I mean, you wouldn't believe the tears, the conversations, and the emotions that they've actually brought from myself and my wider family. So thank you.
Is that a good thing?
Very good.
Thank you.
I think my question is for everyone. I think there is a theme of tragedy that seems to run through a lot of your stories. And my question is the time of happy endings, is that over? Are we not going to see that anymore?
Happy endings, anyone?
I think there's a lot of humour actually running through a lot of our work.
I think through all of them.
Yes, and I think we are dealing with people's struggles in society and in life, but also I think we're probably also celebrating the good things in our lives. So I'd actually disagree that we're writing sort of tragic narratives. Certainly I'm not.
Yeah. You know, I tell my siblings that The Fisherman is about brotherhood, it's a tribute to them. And they will be like, okay, well, why did he end the way he did? So I see the novel as a revelation. I don't know whether it's dark or light. I just try to tell the story the way I've witnessed it myself, or create what I think is possible and plausible.
Happy endings are really difficult. It's much easier to kill somebody. And actually, what is interesting to me about this book is that, on the basis of its early readers, it's about a 50-50 split about whether the ending is hopeful or not. So you have to decide. It ends on a kind of question mark, which I think is not a bad way to end.
Elif?
You know, I'm Turkish. I can't be very optimistic. I think it's not in my DNA. I sometimes think if you open a map of Europe and you look at the river Danube, the blue Danube, beautiful. If you trace it with your finger from Germany towards the Black Sea, as your finger moves, the level of optimism drops. So by the time you reach Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, Black Sea, Turkey, you know, we're not very optimistic people. Maybe we have complex histories, that's part of the reason. But joking aside, I think I like this combination of sorrow and humor, that dialectics. Maybe I like what Gramsci used to talk about, the pessimism of the mind, but optimism of the heart. I think that combination, at least for me, it's the one that works best.
Can I have another question from up there? Yes, please. That's an excellent coronation outfit. Well done, you.
Thank you. Hi, and thank you for an amazing evening. I would like to ask Margaret Atwood. I'm very sorry first, I haven't read your books, but I tried to watch part of The Handmaid's Tale, but also I couldn't really continue actually. But what I would like to ask you is, how is it for you to deal with those images that you create, those very tough and very rough images of what's going on with the women in your story? Maybe it's a very simple answer, I don't know, but for me, working with art as well, it's quite interesting how you work with your emotions on the interests you have in your work. Yeah, I hope that makes sense.
Okay, there is a very simple answer. I didn't invent things. So, as I've said about both of these books, I didn't put anything into them for which there are not references in real life. And the reason I didn't was that I didn't want anybody saying, well, you certainly have a twisted, weird, sick imagination. It's not me, it's the human race. And it could have been a lot worse. There was a lot of worse stuff. So why did I do such a thing? I was tired of people saying it can't happen here. And I was particularly tired of people saying it can't happen here in the United States. So I just brought it all together and I put it there. Where a lot of it did happen. So yeah.
A question from up here, please. Hello.
Hi, first of all, thank you very much for showing the full numbers here, all six of you. I have a question for me. I was wondering, when you were putting together the triggers for every minute of Eula's last brain functioning time, to what extent was that you confronting what you would actually think about if you had just 10 minutes? And if so, were there any memories that resurfaced that were hidden away from you before?
Thank you so much. It's such a great question. I think in some ways, writing this book felt very personal to me, very emotional as well. Mostly because I wrote it at the time when I wasn't myself traveling to Istanbul. And I was thinking about Istanbul a lot. And maybe the question I ask myself is, how do I remember the city? You know, what are the fragments that I carry with me? And then you realize so much of the way our memory works is always triggered with stories, of course. But stories are triggered by senses. So maybe that's why the story, Leila's story is quite sensual, you know, smells, flavors, tastes. And I think Istanbul is full of these things. Sometimes maybe the smell of cardamom coffee leads to a bigger chapter, or the smell of street food. And I realized that's how I remember it too. And in a way, it made me more conscious of how precious each chapter was, because that's the main question you ask: what exactly might she be remembering? The good memories or the bad memories, or a mixture? So you have to be a little bit more selective as an author. It was a challenge for me because of the story, the structure was a bit of a challenge as well. So the senses were my guide all the way through.
Thank you. I think we probably have time for one more question from each mic, so if you want to wrangle each other to try and get that slot, then go for it. Hunger Games are up over there. Hello.
Hello. I want to start by saying thank you. It's an enormous privilege to be in the room with such extraordinary writers and stories. I have a question for Margaret. Margaret, how daunting was it to write again about Gilead when it was such a transformational story and original novel for many of us who read it back at the time when it was still relatively unusual for stories to be being written about women, to go back to that territory knowing how we all felt about what you had written for us?
Was it daunting? I think everything is daunting, or let me put it this way: if it isn't daunting, why would you try it? Yeah, I think that goes for everybody. If it wasn't daunting, you wouldn't have done it. You took it on.
A really long time ago, when I was a baby stand-up comedian, Eddie Izzard told me you should run towards what scares you, unless what scares you is a cliff. It's excellent advice, still now. One last question, make it count.
I just wanted to say how much I adored all the novels, and it really reignited my passion for literature. But the question I wanted to ask, even though it does, the thousands we all, was how important do you think novels are to bring about societal change? Because it seems to me like many of the, well, particularly one of these books, are very reflective of things that perhaps need changing.
Novels for societal change. Who wants to start? Margaret?
Yes, okay, so according to the research, the novel is one of the best ways, in fact it's a very good way, to let people understand what it is like to be another person. Maybe a person quite different from them. Because the novel as a form lets you get right inside another person's imagination and mind in a way that no other art form does. Yeah?
I think there's something to say about living in an age of lies, which we are, and not only in the United States, but around the corner. And I think, I don't want to overclaim for the novel because relatively few novels change the world. But I think what they can do is to re-establish between the writer and the reader some sense of the truth. Because the great difference between fiction and lies is that fiction is a project that aims towards the truth. It might come to the truth through all kinds of strange doors, but that's what it's trying to do. And I think, the paradox is that when our leaders are telling us lies, it may be time for fiction writers to tell you the truth.
I think all the arts are maybe the only check on the brutalities of science. And I think they're absolutely essential. Because we're fed all this technological, scientific, industrial crap. And someone has to take a moral stand sometimes.
Today, that's you, Lucy. We're relying on you. Okay. Any more for any more?
I think novels can create empathy, can expand our imagination, can reimagine the past, can bridge differences, can be a voice in the world for communities that might not be heard. I think a novel can do many, many things that aren't necessarily done as effectively through the other art forms.
I will add to that and what Salman said. So my friends who are doing things that are more interesting, like doctors, lawyers and all that, they asked me, Chigozie, why did you end up with this stuff? And I'm like, you know, think about it as us all marching through this path. And you guys are just like looking, but I'm the guy who is like looking because I don't have anything better to do, and I'm just like looking closely and just telling you, look, this is this is that. So I'm trying to like reveal the world to you because you're too busy to see.
Elif, will you answer too?
I think it's also important to understand that because history doesn't always necessarily go forwards, and we have seen country after country going backwards, I think it's important to read the memoirs of people who have survived the darkest chapters in human history. And when we do that, there's a question that almost all of them are asking, in fact. They say, how is it possible that such atrocities can happen? Is it because human beings are bad? Is it because human beings are evil by nature? And the answer they're giving is not necessarily. Actually, most people are a combination of good and bad. The number of evil people is really small. But nonetheless, horrible things can happen. So how is that possible? And therefore they're saying maybe the opposite of goodness is not necessarily badness. Maybe the opposite of kindness is not necessarily evil. Maybe the opposite of goodness is in fact numbness. Is the moment we become indifferent or desensitized or disconnected, when we stop thinking about other people or caring about other people and somehow atomized. And I think it is in that regard that stories and novels can make a difference, because they make us care about each other again, and they make, they just punch little holes in that that wall of numbness that is unfortunately surrounding us day by day.
That is all we have time for, I'm afraid. I'm so sorry if we couldn't get to your question, but you do stand a chance if you go down to the Claw Ballroom. All our authors will be signing their books. Perhaps if you're feeling flush, you might like to buy.